Hello, everyone. Hi. My name is Laura Sanchez, and I'm the Executive Director at Ophelia's Place. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Jess. It is my absolute honor to welcome you all here today for this extremely special event. So first, a little bit about Ophelia's Place. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting girl-identified youth ages 10 to 18 through education, empowerment, and support. And we do that through our After and Out of School program, partnering with schools for girls' empowerment groups and classroom presentations, offering professional development and trainings, and finally, through our therapy program, of which Parisa was a huge part of from 2014 to 2019. Yay, applause. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take all of the credit for recognizing a truly phenomenal person and then crossing all of my fingers and toes that she would accept our offer to be a clinical intern at OP back in 2014. Thankfully, she said yes, and the rest is her story. And speaking of her story, Smith Family Books will be selling Just Another Epic Love Poem, in which all of the proceeds will be donated to Ophelia's Place. Thank you so much. You can purchase books back here. And then lastly, I just want to mention to everybody that in 2025, we are going to be entering our 20th anniversary of empowering girls all over Oregon. In those almost 20 years, we have grown to 3 locations, Eugene, Junction City, and Albany. We've increased our staff from 5 to 22 and increased our budget by over $1 million. Woohoo, yeah. Whenever we have events, we love to ask our guests to share your advice to your 13-year-old self. So if anyone, if you look back and think about what would you tell yourself as a 13-year-old, you can leave that advice also back here at this table. And if you feel so inclined to donate to our work, we do have a monthly giving program called the OP Society, or QR codes for a one-time donation. Again, all of that is in this lovely table in the back. So that's enough for me. It is now my pleasure to pass this over to Jess, our clinical director, who also accepted a fateful internship offer long ago.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for coming up and getting us started. Welcome to you all to this incredible event. My name is Jess Sarante, as Laura said, and I'm the clinical director at Ophelia's Place. I'm also one of the therapists. I am truly just so delighted for you all to meet and connect today with Parisa Akhbari, truly one of the best human beings I've ever had the chance to meet. Parisa and I both graduated from the University of Oregon's Couples and Family Therapy program right here in Eugene. We did our clinical internships together here at Ophelia's Place, and we both came on as staff therapists following graduation. We were a tiny but mighty team. It was just the two of us, overseen by Laura. And for many years, that's how we ran. In 2019, Parisa returned to her hometown of Seattle, where she continues her mental health practice today, while also writing articles, essays, poetry, and novels. These days, when she's not writing or therapizing, is that right?
I looked it up. It said it was a word.
Excellent. I love it. I just want to make sure I said it right. She can be found trying to replicate her grandmother's drool-worthy Persian recipes, some of which I've had a chance to enjoy as well. Indeed, drool-worthy. Riding ferries around Puget Sound and dancing around the kitchen with her spouse and dogs. That's Indiana right there. Just Another Epic Love Poem is her first published novel, and it has received several starred reviews and has been included in recommended book lists from Autostraddle and Cosmo magazine. So she's pretty much a big deal. I wrote that on the paper. It seemed improvised, but I see now I said that. Anyway, we are thrilled to have her back here today. Welcome, Parisa.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming, for being here today. It's so special to see all these faces that I love and know, and all these faces that I don't. When I was starting to plan the release of this book, I had a meeting with the publishing folks, and they asked, are there any communities that you're a part of that are special to you that you think would turn out and would want to celebrate this book that you've written about teen queer love and coming of age stories? And the only answer that I had was Ophelia's Place, because in my heart, this is a place where I got to see and be a part of such a strong, celebratory, affirming community for girls and non-binary and trans kids and teens. When I first came here in 2014, I had that experience that so many adults have here, which is walking into the space and not being able to believe all of the things that Ophelia's Place offers for young people, and to think what it might have been like to have access to this as a young person, and then to get to be a part of creating that for the next generation. Such a powerful, healing, and exciting experience to get to be a part of. And so for me to return is truly special. Thank you for having me. I think when I think about how my time at Ophelia's Place influenced the writing of this book, and we'll talk about that during our discussion, one of the biggest is just seeing that at Ophelia's Place, I learned that teens are not to be underestimated and their stories deserve to be heard. And that was a centerpiece for me in writing this book. And I hope that you all connect to that aspect of it, just in the way that Ophelia's Place is a beacon for that in the community. So we thought I could start with a reading, and then we'll jump into discussing. Bea and I were 13 when we met, when I transferred into her 8th grade classroom at Holy Trinity. Bea would fight me on this part, but our friendship and everything after began with her pelting me in the back of the head with a wad of paper. Not that I was a stranger to fielding other people's spit wads, but my first day had already been off to a miserable start, mainly because of the uniform jumper. It hung in this thick, carpet-like fabric down my body, a pleated headache of red and gold plaid. This is the first day of the rest of your life, I thought. I looked like a human Christmas tree ornament. And maybe that was the point of Catholic school. How would I know? We had just moved to Crossroads, the one almost affordable pocket in the uber-rich city of Bellevue, Washington. I loved our new neighborhood because of its proximity to the Crossroads Shopping Center, home of the only Iranian-American pizza parlor I had ever heard of. I also loved it because we were surrounded by other brown people. Crossroads felt like a little belly button of familiarity in a giant and strange new city. But our new school wasn't in Crossroads. It was in Medina, where everyone had a home tennis court or a pool. And it wasn't like my old school, which my dad referred to as a crunchy hippie place when he found out I spent science class sifting through the trash bins to sort a composting system. Holy Trinity was a private Catholic school, which was a weird choice given that my dad was raised Muslim. Dad had ushered us, my 11-year-old sister Azar and me, into our new student orientation with a pep talk about how Catholics valued education above all else and how the teachers would only care that we studied hard. I guess he believed that good grades would shield us, like nobody would notice that we were clearly Iranian American and didn't know a thing about Catholicism, because intellect would render us into amorphous orbs of knowledge. The idea of Catholic school had me convinced I'd be transported into a staging of The Sound of Music, nuns and all. From the brochures, the entire student body of Holy Trinity looked like a beaming sea of Von Trapp children. I half expected them to twirl around in their matching jumpers and suit coats and serenade me with Do Re Mi on my arrival. Turns out, didn't happen. Dad pulled up to the school grounds that first day, sneak attack kissing my and Azar's foreheads. "Make it a good day," he shouted as we slipped out of the car, his accent snagging the attention of some tall boys in blazers. Make it the best day of your life. That's how Dad said goodbye to us every day since we left Mom, a charge to make the best of crappy times. Azar and I headed toward the complex of brick buildings, and she immediately broke away from me, flocking toward a gaggle of sixth-grade girls on the lawn. I kept my eyes on the scattered leaves in front of me, not looking up until I reached the arch at the school's entrance, which was engraved with the words, "May God hold you in the palm of his hand." Each building on campus was named after a Jesuit priest or saint, their faces embossed above the doors so that some old dead white guy was always scowling down at you upon entry. Xavier, or creepy goatee dude as I came to think of him, was cavernous with a long dark hallway parting the 2 rows of lockers. The space was packed with students huddled by their respective lockers, every single one of them glued to a phone. The front door thudded behind me, and some of the kids looked up, glaring, before going back to their phones, sending their last messages before first period. I didn't even have my own phone. Azar and I shared my dad's old Galaxy, which meant she was constantly wresting it out of my hands so she could play Pet Rescue Saga or video chat the gazillion friends she left behind in Sacramento. I didn't need my own phone because I didn't have anyone to talk to. As I worked my way toward the classroom, I snuck glances of the Holy Trinity girls. They all looked so shiny and wholesome, like they ate apple pie every night and said prayers and flossed their teeth before bed. Some of them had cross necklaces over their jumpers, and they were all wearing knee-high socks, not the crew-cut ones my dad had picked out for me at the sporting goods store. I'd have to ask Dad for a cross necklace so I could go incognito for as long as humanly possible. I wondered how soon it would be before everyone found out Azar and I weren't Catholic. Behind the door of Miss Burns' 8th grade classroom, 33 sets of eyes zeroed in on me. This was the problem with transferring to a new school in October. Everyone had already established their routine, and here I was shattering their normalcy with an unfamiliar face and my weird crew-cut socks. I tucked into my desk in the corner of the classroom and stared at the crucifix by the doorway. Jesus, blue-eyed and bleeding, hung stretched out on the cross. Beads of red paint circled the nails in his palms and feet. His head lolled to one side under a crown of thorns. It struck me as pretty graphic for a school where you weren't allowed to expose your collarbones or wear nail polish. Jesus was a nice guy, my dad had told me when I asked him why we were going to Catholic school. Lots of Christians don't know this, but Jesus was revered as a prophet in Islam, and there's even a whole chapter in the Quran named after Mary. But I had never seen a dead body like this before, sculpture or otherwise. It made me rethink the cross necklace idea. Peace be with you, class. A light-skinned woman with smooth brown hair broke my focus. She wore a gold blazer and knee-length skirt with a red and gold tie. Going off her outfit alone, I could tell she was nothing like my old teacher, Edgar. He smelled like pipe smoke, and his jeans were chronically mud-stained from helping us collect earthworms for our compost project. Anytime one of us shoveled up a worm from the garden patch, he'd say something ridiculous like, "You dig it?" Miss Byrne pulled out a clipboard for roll call, and I allowed myself to peek at the other students as their names were read aloud. Tristan, Leah, Savannah, Matthew, Spencer. All of them wore red jumpers or blazers, and they all whirred together in my brain, like one of Azar's berry smoothie blender experiments. Beatrice? My eyes wheeled to the row behind me. Beatrice teetered on the back legs of her chair, the metal frame creaking beneath her. She wore round glasses, her knee-highs were mismatched, and her haircut was definitely of the DIY variety. And still somehow I knew she was cooler than me. Not popular, I guess, but memorable. Other kids looked to her when her name was called. She met my eyes. "B," she said to Miss Byrne, and also it seemed to me. "We don't use nicknames at school, Beatrice," Miss Byrne said, returning to her list. "Oh, yes, that's right. We have a new student joining us today." The teacher scanned the back of the class and landed on me. "Mitra." She stalled. "How do you say this?" My voice was stuck in my gut somewhere beneath the sheer birinj I'd had for breakfast. "Esfahani." B was still watching me. Her skin was amber brown like mine, but with dark freckles dusting her nose. "Esfahani," Miss Byrne jotted down a pronunciation note on the roll call sheet. She was trying to be helpful, but she had already spent 10 more seconds focused on me than I could handle. "What kind of name is that?" As she asked, it occurred to me that I should have practiced answering these kinds of questions at home. Then I'd be a pro at deflecting any inquiries into my background. Like Wonder Woman when she used her bracelets to deflect hundreds of whizzing bullets. But I didn't have magic Amazonian bracelets, so I winged it. "It's, a last name?" B laughed so hard that it verged on inappropriate. "Okay," Miss Byrne said, mercifully choosing to move on. "Welcome, Mitra." She set down her roll call sheet and faced the class. "Today we're going to continue our unit on poetry. Page 181, Billy Collins' Litany." Everyone except me pulled out thick textbooks and flipped through the pages. I glanced at the girl next to me who had red ringlets over her eyes. I could make out some of the poem on the page of her open book, but when she caught me looking, she blocked my sight with her elbow. "Follow along with me," Miss Byrne said. I dug my thumbnail into the wood of my desk. The poem started like this: "You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine." It continued describing its subject through metaphors like that, bringing images of birds and bakers and bright sunshine clear into my mind. And it named what the subject is not. Not the plums on the counter, certainly not the pine-scented air. When she finished the poem, Miss Byrne lifted her eyebrows at us. "Reactions?" B's hand shot up. "Yes, Beatrice. I like the images. I like the burning wheel of the sun. But who does this guy think he is?" "Pardon?" "He keeps saying, 'You're this, you're that, you're definitely not that,'" she said. "What if I am the pine-scented air? Where does he get off thinking he can tell me what I am? He doesn't know my life." A boy behind me chuckled. "All right, Miss Ortega, calm down," Miss Byrne said, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Time for small group discussions. Pair up with your partners and share your responses to Litany. I want you to identify how Billy Collins uses the elements of poetry we've been learning about: form, sound, imagery, metaphor." A teacher's aide knocked on the door and Miss Byrne stepped out of the room. Everyone turned toward the kid next to them, and I just sat there, not sure who my partner was supposed to be. "I have to work with the new girl," the redhead beside me whispered loudly to a girl across the aisle from her. Her friend groaned. "Don't work with the new girl," she whined. "Work with me." My chin sunk toward my chest and my eyes locked on the crucifix again. It would be a lot easier to blend in if I at least had a textbook to look through. I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head. Jesus was a nice guy. Then, flick, something soft bounced off the back of my head. Excellent. My first day at Holy Trinity, and my head was already serving as the backboard for someone's private game of basketball. The kids around me stopped chattering, and I took in a slow breath. Then I twisted around in my seat and found it, a wad of crumpled paper. I kept it closed in my palms and slumped back into my chair. Someone coughed. It was B. When I looked at her clueless, she rolled her eyes and then made a gesture with her hands like she was unfurling a scroll. I stared back at her for a moment too long. Then I opened my hand and smoothed out the paper against the edge of my desk. Tiny purple writing emerged from inside the page. They say you're just the new girl, but they should know better. You're really the jelly holding the sandwich together. I'm a thunderclap, not some goblet of wine. Holy Trinity sucks, but at least my poem rhymed. From B. Lee Collins. Miss Byrne came back and I hid B's note in the pleat of my jumper. Nobody had ever written me a poem before. Unless you counted the improvised rhymes Azar liked to scream at me when she was mad, like, Mitra's alone, sitting in a tree, Farting. But those were more spoken word performances than actual poems. When I finally worked up the courage to look back at her, Bee tilted her head to one side and lifted an invisible pen in her hand, scrawling imaginary cursive in the air. She wanted me to write back. When Miss Byrne turned to the whiteboard, I inched Bee's poem out from the pleat in my skirt and scribbled something down. When my moment arrived, I chucked the paper ball back at Bee. She unfolded it immediately. You're the thunderclap and the flash of bright light. I'm the bunny down below, watching the sight. I'm sorry to tell you, but I think we're outmanned. We are both held hostage in the palm of God's hand. A grin broke across her face, lifting the rims of her glasses. There was a flicker even back then, one tiny flash of feeling in the empty shell of my chest. I called it relief. I didn't know to call it love.
Whoa. I've even read the book and I'm having a moment. Oh, I love these characters so much. All right. I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to have a little conversation up here. And then when that is done, I'm going to come out there so that you all can ask your questions. So think about what you might want to know from Parisa about who she is, about these characters she created, this incredible book she wrote. All right. All right. With your past work as a therapist at Ophelia's Place, you had an opportunity to learn about the many themes and issues teens navigate as they grow up. What are some of those themes and issues, and do you discuss any of those in the book? Basically, how has your work as a therapist affected your writing of young adult fiction?
I think that writing and therapy have some unique resonances that maybe don't come to mind for everybody, but for me, the practice of therapy has been about holding a structure for somebody's story and creating a framework where I can help that person make meaning out of their own experiences in a way that forms a cohesive narrative. So how do you make sense out of the hard things that have happened in your life? And how can you put words to your experiences and feel like another person can understand and see that? And so that really translates well to writing as well, because with writing, it's all about your own structure of a narrative. So in therapy, I'm making space for other people's stories, experiences, but I'm also feeling my own set of emotions as I do that in response to what they're going through or in response to my own past experiences. And I think for me, being able to write about these two characters allowed me to give voice to some of the emotional truths that come to the surface when I'm remembering my teen years through the work that I do in therapy. I think that when we talk about some of the hardships that young people and young girls in particular deal with, I think about what the tension must be like between having all these adult experiences like trauma or racism or homophobia or bullying or Just like the coming of age, the desire to have your own independence, the kind of wrestling with your parents and their rules and trying to get your own autonomy, and how that balances with the reality of not having the power, the decision-making ability, and the authority that adults are granted. So you're experiencing all these things that adults are experiencing, but you don't have the power to act in a way that can maybe change the circumstances that you're in. And that creates a lot of frustration. And I think when young adult stories ring true to me, it's because they're really respectful with that frustration. I think that one of the greatest lessons I learned from Ophelia's Place was, like I said, not underestimating young people, also really respecting how our culture does injustice to young people's experiences and stories. We kind of treat young people like that's just puppy love. You'll understand when you're older. These are the rules because I say so. You just don't get it. You know, we kind of dismiss a lot of experiences of young people. And I learned at OP how powerful and how much potential can be released by ceding power to the teens that I worked with and seeing what they're capable of, and being really surprised and amazed by what happened when they got to call their shots in their own life. So that's, one of the many ways OP influenced the writing of this story was for me to look back on my own experiences, my own emotions that I had as a teen, and imagine how I could give voice and power to that younger self, instead of talking down to it or trying to dismiss it.
You're such a good therapist. Okay. All right. This novel is so unique in many ways, but also stylistically. In addition to writing the individual stories of Bee and Mitra, you also include poetry to connect their stories together through their back and forth creation of this epic poem. So how did you come up with the rules for the never-ending poem? And how did you create different narrative voices or styles for Mitra and Bee in the poetry?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, I realized I didn't really introduce the book, and I think that would help people's context. So Just Another Epic Love Poem as a story is a young adult queer romance, but mostly coming of age. And it follows these two girls that you met in the first chapter. You meet them when they're 13, but the story takes off when they're seniors in high school. And they have been best friends for 5 years. And they've also been trading this journal back and forth in which they've been writing a never-ending poem between the two of them for the past 5 years. And as the story unfolds, you watch how that poem changes, how their relationship changes, and how their lives change as they shift from what is a friendship to a romance. And I think when I wanted to approach this story, I thought about the types of communication I had when I was a teen. And, my friends and I would talk in person and we would talk on the phone, but we also were together all day, every day in school. And so we would be writing in each other's notebooks. We would be passing notes. We'd be tucking messages into each other's lockers. We would write these long, epic letters to each other of like, here's everything that happened with my crush in the last 24 hours that I need to detail to you. Like we would pour our hearts out on paper. And I think that sometimes that gets missed in media about young people. You miss some of the written communication because it tends to be such like a visual or dialogue-based format. So I wanted to see how could I incorporate some of the call and response type communication that young people have. If you can imagine or remember having a best friend when you were younger, did it ever feel like you stopped a conversation? I think for me, it felt like there was always just a comma at the end. You would be like, I have to go to my next class, but like, let me tell you everything about this when I see you at lunch. Or, I have to hang up because it's time for dinner, but tonight I'm going to text you and tell you everything that happened. And so what I wanted to create with the never-ending poem was this idea that there would be no beginning and no end to their conversation and to their connection. So they have a rule in the poem that is there's no terminal punctuation. So like no periods, no exclamation points, no question marks. I created a lot of rules for myself, and then I had to solve my way out of them. That was a tough rule, but I think it was important for them to create a space where they really trusted each other to never put a bookend on their relationship. Another rule that they have is that each person starts their section of the poem with the last word that the previous character ended on. And so it's kind of like an echo or a resonance. So if you end on the word sound, the next person starts on the word sound. And again, if you listen to teens talking, and if you're an OP person, you probably do that all day long. Like when you spend a lot of time with someone and you're young, you pick up similar idiosyncrasies and like inside jokes, and you echo each other. That's how we communicate with people that we love and that we're really connected with. So I thought it would be a fun way to have a resonance of like, they're so intertwined and intimate in their friendship that their sentences and their stanzas of poetry blend into each other in that way, even though they're distinct people, and you can see that throughout the novel that they're quite different. Their form of communication has this beautiful through line that they never really tie up neatly in a bow.
I feel like I want to start the next question with bow, but it didn't come. And then also I gave that explanation, which took away from it, starting bow. See, you're such a good writer too. I love these characters so much, and I really like developed my own relationship with them and deep care for them. And I could see that in your writing, that you also had that. So what do you hope that Mitra and Bee learn over the course of the novel?
In writing characters, I find that what helps us relate to them is when we see their vulnerability. You can have a character who is so smart and interesting and exciting and funny, but if you don't see what makes them vulnerable, you might find that you can't really connect with them or relate to them. That tends to be what makes us human. And so I thought a lot about what vulnerabilities each of these characters would bring and how their relationship to the vulnerability might change over the course of the book. For Bee, who is the secondary main character, she's very outgoing and kind of more extroverted and more outspoken, but her vulnerability has to do with feeling unaccepted at home. She feels like nothing that she does is enough, and so she's kind of stopped trying to earn approval from others. And her way of showing that is by being the most herself that she can be and kind of unapologetic. But deep down, she still really feels a pain around feeling that she's rejected at home. So for my advice or my hope for her over the course of the novel is that she could see that she is enough exactly as she is, that she doesn't need approval from others, or that if she isn't getting it, then they're not people who really ultimately will be the most important caring people in her life, and that she can find people who will fully see her, fully accept her, and embrace her for who she is. And then I think for Mitra's vulnerability has to do with past experiences of harm in relationships, and she feels really fearful of change. So her world is very small and contained. She has a lot of rules about what keeps her safe, and her vulnerability comes down to thinking that if she opens up to connection or to a relationship, that she'll be hurt again, and that's not worth it to her. So my hope for her over the course of the novel is that she might see that there are certain people with which it might be worthwhile to open up and to be vulnerable, and that sometimes the risk of opening up is worth it because you get to be fully accepted or loved. And it all comes down to whether or not that person earns your trust, whether they show you that they are going to be there for you and show up for you. But I think that's Mitra's journey through the book, trying to decide, is it worth it to jeopardize her friendship with B for the sake of a romantic relationship? Is it worth it for her to risk reconnecting with her mother at the risk of feeling rejected or abandoned by her mother again? So she's kind of at this turning point in her relationships, and I would wish for her to have the fear and do it anyway.
All right. Why don't you describe teen Parisa for us?
Ooh.
What was she like? And how much of her do we see in any of the characters in the book?
I saw some eyebrow raises out there. I think when writing this book, it was less about capturing my experience or myself as a teen and more about speaking to the true emotions that I had. So I thought about what are the kind of hearts of different experiences that I had and how could I write about those in a fictional way, but toward a true emotional core. So I think when I look at Mitra and B, I might not have a lot in common with them when I was a teen. I wasn't out when I was in high school, and these two characters are. It was a different time when I was in high school. And I also had kind of a reverse experience to Mitra, in that Mitra grows up in secular public school and transfers to Catholic school at 13. And so she's already got this foundation of understanding her idea of spirituality and values and what matters to her. But I grew up in Catholic school and then I left as a teenager. So I wanted to imagine for her what that reverse journey might look like. But for me, I think when I was a teen, I was much more social than Mitra is. And also in other ways, much more eager to please others. I think Mitra is less concerned about what other people think or making them feel comfortable and happy. But being born and bred into Catholic school, I really had a longer term survival strategy than Mitra did. I was in it for life. And so my attitude was doing what I needed to do to feel accepted and to fit in, even when that maybe counteracted what would be the right thing for me. So in that way, I think, different life experiences, but some similar emotional truths. I had to grapple with fear and acceptance and vulnerability, just in some different ways.
I like picturing teen Parisa. All right. So as Laura was talking about, at Ophelia's Place, we just love asking adults who visit us, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 13-year-old self? So, Parisa, if you could chat with your 13-year-old self, what would you share with her? And also, what do you think she would think about you and your big old life now?
I could talk to my 13-year-old self. Let's see. So that's 8th grade. I think that I would, when I was in 7th and 8th grade, I think I had like my first glimmers that I was maybe a little different. And I embraced that in some ways, and in other ways felt like, oh, I really have to put a lid on this if I'm going to make it through the rest of my teen years in this environment. So I think I would sit down and say that it's okay to embrace that part of yourself and to be curious about getting to know it more, and not to be afraid of that part of yourself that feels different. And also to say that the life that I was leading at that time is only one type of life that I could lead. So I just thought that my environment was the only option. and the way that I was living was the only way that things could be done. And I didn't imagine that I could transfer schools, or I could make a group of friends that would be really accepting, or that I could risk doing really hard things and still survive and have a wonderful life. So I would invite myself to look around for other possibilities. And I think if my 13-year-old self saw me, she would be a little overwhelmed, a little scared. But ultimately, I hope that she would see how rewarding it is to really embrace who you are, even if this is not at all what I would have hoped for when I was 13. I hope some part of me might see, like, oh, she looks like she's living her best life.
Well, I love that. All right, we're almost at a time for them to ask you questions, but I know we've got some OP folks in the room, and so I just wonder if you have any advice for any young writers who would like to see themselves in your place one day.
Yeah. I recently did a visit to my former high school, the high school I graduated from, and we had a wonderful crowd of young writers with all kinds of questions. And if I had to say what the theme of their questions would be, it was a theme of, like, am I doing this right? It was questions like, am I writing enough per day? Can I really be a writer if I don't like to read that much because I'm dyslexic? Can I really be a writer if people won't relate to my story because I have a unique upbringing and background, and like not everybody shares that? All the questions were really like, am I doing this right? Am I enough of a writer to call myself a writer, right? So my advice would be to trust yourself. If you are writing, you're a writer. It doesn't matter how much you're doing per day. It doesn't matter if you're typing it into the notes app on your phone or if you're dinking it on a little typewriter like a old-timey author. If you like to write and you're writing, that is enough. And people will find your story and relate to it. You might think that your experience is super out there and super weird and unique and nobody will get your humor, but there will absolutely be people who resonate with your story. The example that I gave to the school was, I just wrote a book about an Iranian American kid in Catholic school who's queer. And I thought when I was writing this, nobody's going to relate to this experience. And you know what? So many people have come up to me and said, this reminds me of my Catholic school years, or this reminds me of my coming out journey, or this reminds me of my, conservative background or whatever. So people don't have to connect with the exact experience that you had to relate to your emotions, your themes, all of that. So I hope that young writers will be encouraged and embrace their, inner voice. Now is a time to be really empathetic and kind to yourself rather than being critical or judgmental. Just come with warmth towards your little inner writing voice.
All right, didn't I tell you all that she's one of the best people ever?
You're forgetting that I started with you and Laura, the three of us in the corner. So how do you think I learned all this self-compassion?
Aw. That's a very lovely reframe. So we want to hear from you.
I was wondering, are the books only available to get today, or will we be able to get them other days?
Yeah, so we today have booksellers from Smith Family Bookstore, and they will be selling the books today. But the books are available online or at your local favorite bookstore. You can get it pretty much wherever new young adult books are sold. So if you don't pick one up today, you can definitely get one in the future. And if OP's library doesn't have one yet, I'll make sure that they have one before I leave so that folks can, oh, you got, you already got it.
We're
Okay. So folks can also check it out from OP's library, and the public libraries also will have copies available. And there's an audiobook for people who prefer audio. I know that some people find that it's really hard to just sit and read a book. So if you're an audio person, I've heard the poetic narration is really sweet.
Do you have any advice for like writing characters who are already in a relationship, like romantically?
Yeah. So what kind of questions or issues are you running into with writing romantic relationship?
I'm not really running into so many issues so much as I'm interested in another person's perspective on how they do it.
Yeah. So could you tell me more about maybe the context so I know what to focus on?
Generally just like what they're like once they start getting into a groove, like that transition period between oh my god and like okay, cool.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, first of all, I love that you're writing stories. And I think the fact that you're coming to events to learn more is going to be super cool and super helpful for your writing. I think that one of the tools for writing really good relationship dynamics is to look at the art around you. So that could be the books you read, or if you're not a book person, it could be TV shows, movies, music, but anything that you think tells a story really well, and try to see what are the elements of storytelling that really work. So like, what is it about the dialogue between this romantic partnership that's like really hitting the right spot for you? Or what is it in this book that really evoked your emotions and made you feel for the couple that you're writing about? When we're talking about dialogue, it's also really helpful to like go to a coffee shop or, a museum or a public place and just listen, and not eavesdrop in a malicious way, but like listen to the people chatting around you and notice how different the ways that we communicate might be when we're really familiar with someone versus somebody who's new, right? So if you're at a coffee shop and there's a couple next to you, maybe you'll say like, can I guess how long they've been together? Or how's their relationship going? And how can I tell from the words that they're using? And you might notice like, okay, they have a lot of similarities in the way they talk. They probably know each other really well. Or, they're really affectionate and like super full of those like affectionate pet names for each other. Maybe they're in this like honeymoon phase. So you might be able to pick up some of the unique aspects of different phases of relationships. So there's like this element of humor too, right? That people who have been together for a long time probably develop some funny ways to work through their conflict. They might have jokes about their same old patterns that they get into, and you might notice things like that. So I think it's all about showing that through the way that they talk and the way that they relate, as opposed to telling, right? But I think you'll find a lot of good examples of that in media and also in real life around you.
So I know therapists are really into process, and I'm wondering if you could share about the process of writing this book. I'm really interested in like, I don't know how long it took, and what was it like to revise your own writing? Did you work with an editor? What was that like? I'm just super curious about the process.
Yeah. Love the process. So this book, probably the first seeds of it, I would say, started at the very end of 2019, which feels like so long ago, right? To be working on a book for that long. But I probably only took 5 months to write the first draft. And the rest of that time involved all these other steps in making a book that I didn't even know about. So in terms of the process of writing, I'm pretty reliant on outlines. Some people will just jump in to an empty page and see where it takes them, and they won't know what's coming next. But I really like to have an outline. So I start with a character outline, getting into what are their personality traits, their vulnerabilities, their strengths, their ways of speaking, their astrological signs, all the kinds of things that help me know them really well. And then I get into an outline of the plot. Where's the story going? And I like to follow, in this story, a 3-act structure, which is kind of a conventional way to tell a broader story like this, where there's kind of like a peak of action in 3 different places in the book. That's something that a lot of our movies and TV and books will follow in media. So readers tend to really gel well with a 3-act structure. But my writing process, I like to light a candle. I think scents can be very evocative of emotions. If you ever notice, like you smell something and you remember something really well. So I find that helps me get in the right headspace. I like to have some tea. I set aside a few hours, and I try to keep my expectations low. So instead of saying, I'm going to write 10 pages right now, I would say, I'm going to work on this for an hour. And maybe in that hour, I only get a teeny bit done. Or maybe in that hour, I'm really on fire. But the hour is what I'm committing to, as opposed to, I have to pull 1,000 words out of somewhere today. So that was helpful to me, to know that, over time that's going to add up and it's all going to come together. Because this is kind of a unique story in the sense that it's a combination of prose, poetry, text messages, emails, transcripts, found documents, all those different kinds of things, I had to use something to help organize all the ephemera. So I had Post-its, like one of those serial killer walls. It was like covered all over everything, and I would rearrange them to help me make sense out of what I was doing, what was the narrative going to be. So the Post-it system for me was chef's kiss. That I wouldn't have been able to finish it without that. But I think everybody finds what works for them best. I know people who write way late into the night. I know people who wake up at 5 a.m. and they write before their kids wake up or before they go to school or work. I know people who write on their phone, on the train, or on their lunch breaks. All of it works. It's just a matter of what works for you. For me, it was usually in the evenings, after dinner, while we're resting on the couch, I would write. And then, during the day when I got an hour here or an hour there. After that process and after the book sold, I was able to work with an editor, and that took a lot of time to be able to have somebody else's perspective about what makes a good story and how to shape it into the best possible story that it could be. So I think from a place of advice that I could go with that, I'd say, if you find someone who really understands what you're trying to do, whether that's an editor or a friend who's a reader or a critique group friend, as long as they really understand what you're trying to do, then you can trust everything that they say. And you can trust that their advice or their suggestions are going to be coming from the right place. So I really was grateful to find an editor who knew what I was trying to say. And then when she gave me, feedback that said, this part doesn't work, I would think like, oh, she knows where I'm trying to go. And if she thinks I'm not getting there, then I need to change that. So that was really helpful to me. And then the last phase of the book is all the technical stuff that you don't think about. So like typesetting and copy editing and proofreading and picking out the font, picking out the cover, designing it, doing all the publicity and marketing. So that's a lot of why it takes like 2 or 3 years to publish a book, because there's a whole team of people who put their hearts and souls into bringing it together. So that's why it's been such an epic journey to get to this moment.
I know that it sounds like you wrote most of the book pretty quickly, but I know that when you were writing the book, you had a start on it, but you had a book deal before it was done.
Yes.
And so when I think about that, I just think that sounds like a lot of pressure and sounds scary. And so thinking about your process and knowing that you had this deadline and, people counting on it, like what did you do when that was like scary and you woke up and you didn't have any words to write and it was hard? Like, what happened then?
Yeah. I was just today talking about a quote with a friend of mine that is a quote for the writing life, but I also think is really relevant to therapists or people who are working with, the helping professions. this writer said, when you're driving alone in the dark at night on a winding country road and you've got spotlights on, you've got your headlights on, you can only see 500 feet ahead of you at any given time, and the rest is black, right? But you can make the whole journey that way. You can make the whole journey home that way. And that was how I felt writing this novel. I could only see the next chapter or the next scene or the, vague shapes of where I needed to go. And I know what home looked like, right? I know I needed to get to the end, but I couldn't see the way. But I had to trust that if I just keep going and I can see this first 500 feet, then the next bit will become illuminated and the next bit. And you have to trust that whatever part of you is like shining that light forward is going to get you there the rest of the way. So I definitely had days where I felt intimidated, but I had an outline. So that was kind of like a map for me. And then I had that headlight that was like, I know where I am now. I know the shape of things now. I'll get there. I'll get the rest of the way there.
There's a story I'm working on that's about like 5 friends that meet each other, and I don't know how to end it because I have plans for a second book, but
I'm so excited that you're writing. And like I said before, I think one of the best things young writers can do, other than to trust your voice, is to get together with other folks, talk about books, talk about stories, talk about writing, and kind of learn from others around you. What I heard was you're wondering how to end your story because you have ideas for your next book. And one thing that I can say is when I feel like I don't have a compass or I can't figure out where I'm going, I look back to what I call the beating heart of the story. And that is like, if I had to say in one question or one sentence what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to talk about, or what I'm asking through the work, what is it? So for this book, my beating heart was about, is the risk of vulnerability worth it? And I know throughout every page that I'm writing that that's the center. It's beating, its heart is beating on every page. And that really drove me through the whole writing of the book. So what I would ask you is to maybe zoom out and think about your book and think about what's the beating heart of these 5 friends. And that might help you see a sort of resolution to the story to bridge the way toward your next book that you want to work on. So like, what's the central question that you're asking or the central topic that you're exploring? What's that beating heart that drove you to write this in the first place? Something motivated you to write this in the first place. What was that? And that might help you find your way toward the ending.
So I was just really enraptured with the way that poetry came into the relationship between these 2 friends and the development of that relationship. And it made me really curious about your relationship with poetry. And I was curious if you could tell like a first memory or a substantial memory of your development of relationship with poetry during your childhood.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Poetry as a medium of expression is really powerful in Iranian culture. It's a combination of mystical and history and spiritual and cultural pride. There's all these different ways that poetry shows up in Persian and Iranian culture. And so when I thought about telling this story, I thought Mitra, this character, is in an environment where there's a lot of spirituality that doesn't look like her connection to spirituality. So she's in this Catholic environment where she's getting one view of what spirituality can look like. And there might be parts of that resonate for her, but there's parts that don't. And so what does she have to hold up against that? And that for her is her connection to poetry and some of the mystical elements of it that she learned from her family. Particularly, she draws on Hafez, who is an ancient Persian poet that we like to read, especially at the holidays, and get some divine answers to our big existential questions. And she does that in the novel as well. For me, when I think about poetry growing up, in school, I didn't really connect with it. I felt like it was a bit inaccessible, like it was oftentimes the old dead white authors that I just didn't relate to. And oftentimes also, if you think about the poetry that maybe you learned in school, sometimes it's really structured, like a sonnet or a quintet or a whatever. And it might feel like, I don't know how to write that. It's very old-timey or it's out of reach. So I felt like that wasn't for me. And I didn't see how I could use it as a way to express myself. But at home, in my relationship to my Bibi John, my grandma, she had a book of Hafez poetry, and my parents did. And at holidays, we would take it out and ask a question, and she taught me how to divine answers from it and to understand the context of what was being said. And even though that was ancient, I started to see, oh, I could see myself in this. And I started to see that there were women poets and queer poets and poets of color that I could connect to, and also styles of poetry that were really breaking out of the structure of what I was told good poetry should be, right? I started to see like, oh, this could be radical and totally free form. And it doesn't have to follow what I learned in school. It doesn't have to be so strict. So for me, that was a really big entry point into poetry. You'll notice in the book that I draw from some of my favorites. There's a lot of just lovely poets that get some airtime, like Naomi Shihab Nye, Mary Oliver, Anis Mojgani, Maya Angelou, some other poets that the characters draw from because they influenced me. They influenced my perception of the art. And then, of course, Hafez and Rumi from the Iranian traditions. But yeah, my early memories would be pulling out the Hafez's divan at the holidays and trying to see if I could figure out what he was trying to tell me.
All right. So time-wise, I'm trying to be timely. I'm never timely. Is there any question that nobody asked but that you wished they would? It's okay if the answer is no. I'm not trying to set you up here. But like, is there a last thing you want to share with anyone that you were hoping to be able to say in response to a question?
In writing my acknowledgments, the last thing that I came to was that I wanted to thank all of the young people that I've had the good fortune to know, especially through my role as a therapist at OP. But seeing the creativity, the passion, and the bravery of the young people here really inspired me to tell this story. And so my hope is for young people out there that you, in talking to me today, or maybe in reading this book, or in anything else in your life that you encounter, that you start to see that your voices matter and that your story is worth telling. And I can't wait to read it or hear it or listen to it. So that's my hope for you. And in the spirit of reciprocity, I'll be signing books for you, but I left a copy of the book that is for me over here that you can sign, and you can write a message, or you can write your name, or you can put whatever you want, because this story really was a community influenced experience, and I want to bring it back to all of you and the impact you had. So please feel free to do that. And thank you. Thank you so much for coming and being here with me.
Thank you so much again, Parisa. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the work you've done at Ophelia's Place. Thanks for all of the youth's lives you've touched. Thanks for being one of my favorite people in the whole world. And just thank you all for coming and celebrating this incredible feat that Parisa has accomplished.
Thank you so much, everyone.